This is John Majori with MajoriOnBowie.com, where you could find a weekly interview on this YouTube channel that has something to do with David Bowie. And for daily content, check out the blog, www.majorionbowie.com. And while you're here, why don't you hit like and subscribe? Because today I have an incredibly special interview for you. Kevin Armstrong. Kevin Armstrong is joining me today. He is a versatile guitarist, celebrated for his collaborations with David Bowie, but not just David Bowie. Kevin has played with everybody. Iggy Pop, Sinead O'Connor, Thomas Dolby, Brian Eno, Tin Machine, Morrissey. Along the way, he's even played with Paul McCartney and informally with George Harrison and everybody else. Nearly 2 billion people saw Kevin play at the Live Aid concert with Bowie in 1985, when around that time, he contributed a guitar to the hit Dancing in the Street with Bowie and Mick Jagger and played on the Absolute Beginners soundtrack. And he helped write and create the famous title track, Absolute Beginners, which is also the name of his wonderful memoir, Absolute Beginner. He was essentially the fifth member of Tin Machine on the first Tin Machine album. He co-wrote with Bowie the title track of One Outside and played on a couple of the other songs on the album, which is one of my favorite Bowie albums. And more recently, he's toured with Mike Garson in the A Bowie Celebration group, which is not to be confused with the Celebrating David Bowie tour. Note my shirt, Kevin. And Kevin was announced to be part of the lineup of the European leg of that tour next year. It was just announced this week. So Kevin has played with Iggy Pop on 3 different tours and on the Blah, Blah, Blah album, which was also produced by David Bowie. There's so much more, which is why you want to go out and get his book, which has the added benefit of in parts being hilarious, which I really wasn't expecting. As you know, Kevin, I was reading the book and in parts, I'm sitting there in bed with my wife and I'd wake her up laughing, which I just, I'm not going to tell the bus story, but I'm just thinking about it. It's hilarious and it's a really compelling rock and roll memoir. So Kevin Armstrong, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, John.
So let me start by asking you about the story that you tell at the very beginning of your book, which is you're just about to set off to play the Live Aid concert, which in your book you say 1 billion people saw. I've read that it was closer to 2 billion people. At least at the time, it was viewed by more people around the globe than any other rock concert. So let me see if I got the story straight. You wake up in your mansion, your palatial estate, and your private helicopter flies you to Wembley Stadium. Do I have that right, or is the story?
Well, you just got a couple. You know that you've got the first detail wrong there, because I was living in very very humble circumstances in a block of municipal council flats in South London, which I'd broken into illegally and squatted. I was an illegal tenant there. So a mansion. Now maybe we're borderline mansion territory, but right then we were in illegal squat territory. So I was in a tiny apartment, Victorian apartment. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I know I got that wrong on purpose, just because I thought that you paint a picture of enormous contrast between your sort of very modest day-to-day living, and then you're going to play before the biggest rock concert in history.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's to emphasize the mercurial nature of rock and roll, isn't it? One day you're playing in the pub, or you're playing to 2 people, or you're playing in your bedroom, and the next minute you can be playing in a stadium, and it's just it can turn on a phone call.
Yeah. So how did you get that gig?
Well, I got the gig with Bowie from an A&R man at EMI Records after I lost a deal there. I was part of that massive influx of young singer-songwriters, and that's what I am, really. I'm a singer-songwriter, yeah. Believe it or not. And we had a deal with EMI, and then we'd lost it because it didn't turn into fruit straight away, and that's what they were doing then. They were throwing money at things and then redlining them within a few months if they didn't do anything. So I found myself kind of at a loose end, and the guy at EMI who was partly responsible for my deal there just took pity on me and said, go to Abbey Road and take your guitar and you can thank me later, kind of thing. And that was because he'd heard that Bowie needed a band for a secret session in Abbey Road studio, and I just got thrown in there at the deep end and made something of it. I mean, I connected with him on the day, and we, you know, there was clearly something he saw in me that he thought we could go forward in some way. And Live Aid, he'd been asked to do it just at that point, so he just, once we'd hit it off, he just said, well, do you want to do this charity concert with me? Put a band together. So I said, yeah, why not? And we went forward from there to an on and off 10-year relationship.
So he characterized it as a charity concert, and you're thinking you're to play on the front lawn of like a boarding school or something.
I had no idea. I mean, it wasn't announced or anything there. He just said, "Oh, Bob Geldof's, asked me to do this charity gig," and I thought, well, it's Bowie. It can't be nothing. It's got to be something. And then, of course, when it was announced, and there was an inkling of what was happening around the "Do They Know It's Christmas" record and all that, which was a big hit, and so it became clearer as it got nearer that what a global phenomenon it was going to be.
Yeah. So the secret session that you referred to that preceded this was for absolute beginners.
It was, and not only that, in the same building in a different set of studios with a different team altogether. It was the Labyrinth sessions for the movie Labyrinth, in which he was involved at the same time. Yeah. So it was those two things. Yeah. So we were there to do demos for the film soundtrack of Absolute Beginners.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me about the way you tell the story is he has a sort of an unfinished idea for the song Absolute Beginners, and you jump in and start giving him suggestions about the arrangement and how it should go.
Yeah, well, in retrospect, I think that was the point at which I connected with him on some sort of creative level, because he wasn't sure whether what he had was finished. Yeah. And looking at it, I was immediately certain that I could tell him it was and show him why. Yeah. So that's what I contributed, really, just saying, yeah, this is already. And he was like kind of somehow unsure of it, and that at that moment I pushed it over the line so that we could record it in the last hour of the session that was left at Abbey Road, and it turned out to be an amazing. I wish I could hear that demo, because the demo itself just sent shivers up your spine straight away.
So I'm picturing you had to be a kid, and you're advising David Bowie on how to make his music better.
Well, I wasn't. I mean, I suppose I was a little green, in that situation. But I'd always had the conviction since I was really young that this was going to be my place in the world somehow. As a guitarist or as a musical person with musical energy in some way, and to bring something. So that's what it was. It was just a sort of confidence of youth saying, "Oh yeah, I can sort this out," And he believed me, and it worked. And so I think that was that. It was that bit of sort of youthful confidence in me that he probably was attracted to. Yeah.
And so around that time, you also find yourself playing on Dancing in the Street, which was an enormous hit. And there's a picture you paint at one point where you're literally sitting between Mick Jagger and David Bowie.
Yeah, well, he asked me to turn up he said he had this other idea as an add-on for Live Aid concert, and would I go and meet him in this place in London, in central London, and bring an acoustic guitar, which I did. And then I was still at that point just kind of shocked that I was working with him in some way. Yeah. And then he bowls down the hall with Mick Jagger. So, and then we sat there and workshopped the song.
Yeah. So did you're at that point, do you think this is just how life is? This is going to be the next 50 years?
You know what I did? I really did. I mean, it sounds arrogant to say, but it wasn't. It was a sort of. It felt like a homecoming to be in the right place at the right time and just think, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I thought about since I was 13, 14 and started playing guitar. So it did feel, although it was obviously exciting and everything, and it really did feel like my natural, somehow I'd found my right niche inside.
Yeah. So for somebody who's not in music professionally, that is an incredible story. But then it's sort of bookended by something you mentioned almost in passing much later in the book, which is how you find that you encounter people who find it difficult to understand that you don't necessarily know where your next paycheck is coming from, and that's been your experience for 50 years. Is it?
Well, that's the experience of anyone in a freelance creative role, isn't it? Really,
Yeah.
don't you think if you're a graphic designer, or if you're an artist, or if you're a, a writer or whatever, it's that insecurity is part of it, unless you happen to tap into something, and you make a load of money or something. You're J.K. Rowling or something.
Yeah.
Everything is always a risk, and has uncertainty built into it.
Yeah.
That's part of the process. Yeah.
I got the sense from how you wrote it, that you felt like you even alluded to it just a few moments ago, that you had a kind of road to Damascus moment when you were really young. And there's a line that you have that goes something along the lines of, "The guitar is me, and I am the guitar, and this is my life." And
yeah, you're referring to, as a kid, when I was in my first year of playing, really, when I was walking across a field on a summer's day, and I had this kind of epiphany about my future, and it was
yeah,
a sort of semi-spiritual kind of, although I'm not a terribly sort of woo-woo, spiritual person necessarily, but it was like a moment of, like a lightning bolt, like, oh my God, this is it. This is what I'm going to do.
I get that sense from throughout your book, and I keep referring to your book because it's fresh in my mind, where it seems like you're pulled into playing, even in those early, when you're a child, you're writing about how you're playing until your fingers are bleeding, and throughout the story, you're playing every kind of music that I could imagine, except maybe classical, and maybe you've done that too.
Well, I did a bit of that with the piano, but it was just music. It was in the blood, really. My grandfather was a professional musician in the 1920s, so he was always drumming on the couch, on the arm of the couch and stuff, even when he was a very old man, because he was a good drummer, and he was also a saxophone player in a dance band. And my mother, his daughter, also had a very good piano skills, and she was a light opera singer and stuff. And so this music thing was in the blood, and I think there is a kind of genetic propensity, isn't there? I think that some people have a music bit in their brain which is better, they're born with, in a way, and that's what it felt like to me. And also, I think I've been really lucky to discover very young that I was a little bit good at something. I could get better at it, and it could be my thing. And I think that's been a real blessing to not have to say into my late 20s or whatever, well, I wonder what I'll do with my life. I never had that. I had that from 13, 14 years old. That was it. No safety net.
Even the way you just said it, you said, I'm a little bit good at something. And throughout the book, there are these moments where you're expressing what you call the imposter syndrome. Like you're doubting whether or not you're good enough. And even the subtitle of the book is Memoirs of the World's Best Least Known Guitarist.
Yeah, well, someone else gave me that line. I suppose what you're trying to say is that self-doubt is a part of my journey too, and I think I think that's true. I mean, I've sort of come to terms with it a little bit, but there's always, I think that's reflected in the title as well, Absolute Beginner, which is obviously a reference to the song, but it's also become a bit of a philosophy for me to always try and learn something with everything you're doing, and not ever get to a point where you think, I know exactly what all this is about. There's always that slight open door going, I can learn something from this, even though I do know a lot. I've had a lot of experience in lots of areas, but there's always something to be learned, and I think that's a little healthy sort of fear that goes on.
Yeah. That's I was wondering. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, because as I'm reading these expressions of self-doubt, I'm wondering, what else does the universe have to do to tell this guy that he's really good?
well, I mean, in some ways, I think everybody, however successful they get at something, or however they've done it always can say, well, I missed this thing, or I could have done this better, or there could have been more, or I could have taken a turn where I'd written a load of hits or something like that.
Yeah.
But that never happened. But obviously, I'm very well aware of how lucky and fortunate I've been to have the career that I've had with people. But there's always room for improvement.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So I mentioned that you you contributed to the first Tin Machine album, and you were essentially the fifth member. But
Mm.
Bowie told you that he didn't want to name you as the fifth member. I didn't understand that. Why? Why did it
Well,
make
I
it?
think I don't know about that. I mean, he was. It's all described in the book, but I think he had the. Bowie was clearly an expert at image creation and
Yeah.
storytelling and character building and all the rest of it, and all that. And I think the Tin Machine made sense to him as commercially and publicly as him and the Sales Brothers and Reeves.
Yeah.
And that's it. So if it was him and the Sales Brothers and Reeves and Kev, it was like it just made more sense to him in terms of an identity in that way, and that's fine. And I understood that, and I went on to work with him again afterwards, and he was always very kind to me. But that's how he did it. So I was brought in after the creation of the band. To be fair,
Uh-huh.
they were already deep into the album by the time I got there, and then so I was used as a kind of just an extra musician to bring something to that first album and to the first tour.
Yeah. Now you wrote that the guitarist who's named as one of the members is Reeves Gabriels, who worked with Bowie
Yeah.
for many years, and you wrote that he's the sort of guitarist for Bowie that I could never be. I'm more of a musical glue all rounder. What does that mean?
Well, I think I'm useful. I think I'm useful in a lot of ways. But as I say, but coming from the background as a singer songwriter, what I do is more about. It's not really about the guitar as a competitive sport, if you like.
Yeah.
So I'm not a shredder. I can
Yeah.
play solos and I can do something impressive with the guitar, but I'm not like Eddie Van Halen or Reeves Gabrels. And Reeves was a stunt guitarist. I mean, in a lot of ways, you're gonna look at him and go, wow, that guy's got this amazing technique, and he makes these incredible wild sounds and everything, and that's good. But I'm more about like, what's the arrangement of the song, what's the best way we can use this, and what's the best way we can use that. So that's it. I'm more of a safe pair of hands when it comes to the foundations of the music, whereas
Yeah.
Reeves is clearly a kind of maverick artist with his instrument.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So one last Tin Machine question. You mentioned the song "I Can't Read," and
Yeah.
I've heard Bowie talk about that long after Tin Machine was done, and he says, if you don't like Tin Machine, I beg you to listen to this one song, which is "I Can't Read." So I don't think it's actually about literacy, and you raise what I thought was a compelling question. Is it "I can't reach it" or "I can't read shit"? So what do you
Well,
know? What's the
what
answer?
do you know? Well, I don't know. I don't know. Honestly, don't know. I was never part. I never saw anything written down on a lyric sheet. I've just heard it the same as you. So it can be one or the other. And I think he designed that way. Designed it that way. He was fond of puzzles, wasn't he, Bowie? And that's
Yeah.
what's so great about his work altogether, was that he did put these Easter eggs and puzzles and joined up little bits of narrative in for the years apart in things and all that, and that's why it's so fascinating, the work still.
Yeah, I think so. I write this blog on a daily basis, and people say, "How could you write about the same guy every day?" And I feel like, for what you just said, he leaves us Easter eggs or things to think about, or to sort of mull over. You're very much part of keeping the legacy alive, with some of the collaborations you're doing with other alumni, and I'm going to come back to that. But is there a sense among, like, even this week, I saw a band called Killer Star in New York City that included Mike Garson, Mark Platty, Jerry Leonard, and you mentioned you were in Holland, and I know this week there was a concert where Ava Cherry and Carmine Rojas played with a Dutch cover band, and it seems like there's an alumni association. What is that about? And
Yeah, well, I just got back from Amsterdam playing that gig with Starman NL. That's what
I didn't know you were a part
yeah,
of it.
I was on the show, yeah, with Carmine and Ava, and who I mean, Carmine I've toured with,
Yeah.
and Ava I've met in New York at the Bowie convention last year and
Yeah.
in Liverpool this year. So she's a sweetheart. And yeah, this alumni thing is interesting because again, it's a celebration of Bowie's work, and he's still the extraordinary thing is he's still bringing people together, musicians and collaborators of his together, even after he's gone, and we're
Yeah.
meeting up and doing things with each other and digging and making new friendships and new connections. I mean, I've actually been asked to do something with Carlos Alomar and George Murray next year, and that's amazing to me. I mean, I was a kid reading Carlos's name on records and think, oh God, I wish I could do that.
Yeah. You see
Yeah.
the clips of Bowie doing promoting Young Americans, which is now 50 years old, and there's
Yeah.
like baby Carlos Alomar there.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah, I mean that's what Bowie did. That's again a typical sort of left field smart move. He went to Brooklyn and found the best Puerto Rican and black musicians he could find, and put and had them as his band. And he was still doing that right at the end. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I went up to I did a bit of a one-man performance in support of Donny McCaslin's band
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
North Shields, and I'd never met Donny before, but seeing his band in performance, I can completely understand why Bowie walked into the club with Maria Schneider and saw Donny's band and went, okay, I'm having that.
Yeah. That's
The
amazing.
sound. And that's what he did with Carlos and George and Dennis Davis back
Yeah.
in the 70s in Brooklyn too. He just wanted to throw the dice up in the air and then say, right, I'll have these guys. And he was great at that. He was great at mixing it, matching people, putting people together, watching Earl Slick and Mike Garson on the same stage and going, how did those guys get to play together? Well, it was because of Bowie, and
Yeah.
because of the breadth of his work could encompass those influences. I mean, Killer Stars, something I think I might be doing something with them in the new year here in London. I did a gig with them last year. I mean, they're interesting because they seem to have come out of nowhere, but they've got the resources to gather these alumni into what they're doing, and that's another little. So it's not a Bowie tribute, is it? It's a sort of original band,
Right.
but they've decided to latch on to the alumni thing and just put people together who might not have otherwise found a way to play together.
Yeah. It's like you said, it's like I don't know, like the spirit is still making music even when the body's gone.
It's amazing, isn't it? And I think that's because, I mean, it's reflected in the fact that Bowie was a very light-hearted, funny, and charming person to be around. But there was a lot going on under the hood, wasn't there? I mean, he wasn't just about pop music or stardom or anything like that. He was about a lot of interests, a lot of other interests. He was a Renaissance guy, he was a voracious reader of religious literature, poetry, stuff about architecture, stuff, he just knew a lot about a lot. And that goes into the work and made him a very well-rounded human being before he ever got to doing any art, with it.
Yeah. Yeah. You wrote, as you're performing some of the songs, some of the older songs that you were not originally on, that you wrote that it's been a revelation to get inside the songs and gain a new insight into Bowie's early work at a deeper level. What are some of the insights that you were referring to?
Well, I suppose it's like a masterclass in songwriting. If you go back even to the to early stuff, and I perform some of it with a guitar and a looper, and I do a one-man show, and I make some video content, and I read some stories, and I play songs, but I play them in quite a naked way with just one instrument, or one instrument and maybe some loop that I've made or something like that. But it's not full backing tracks by any means. It's all just guitar, and when you strip away all the production and all the whistles and bells from the songs, what you get is this a real masterclass in interesting songwriting. Really interesting, that structurally, chordally, the whole way he was approaching melody is really unique, and it really had a flavor the whole way through. And you can really see it in the writing right from Back and Beyond. For instance, here's a good Easter egg: Ashes to Ashes, right? That had Major Tom, didn't it, as a
Yeah.
central character. So at one end of his career, we had Major Tom popping up in Space Oddity, and the other end of his career, we had Major Tom popping up in Black Star. The Ashen Thrush is right at the midpoint, and the intro and the main vamp of that song is a triangle of chords. It's not a 4-chord pattern or a 2-chord pattern like in most pop songs. It's a 3-chord vamp that goes around, and you think, wow, whether he knew about that or whether he just had a natural way of making these puzzles interesting, I don't know, but they're there.
See, that's the type of musical detail that I think the casual listener, or even somebody who likes to explore the lyrics, wouldn't necessarily pick up on.
No, that's right. That's the thing, is that's why you're still talking about Bowie every day, and that's why there are a myriad websites and Facebook pages and clubs and societies and everything else dedicated to him, because you don't often come across artists who are so very wide.
Yeah. And he didn't just make like, he didn't just sing and play instruments. He also produced, and I'm mentioning that by way of introducing Iggy Pop to this story. You worked on Blah Blah Blah, which Bowie produced, but it's an Iggy Pop album. And one of the things that struck me was your depiction of Iggy Pop. He really comes off as a nice guy, but that's not his stage persona.
Well, he's a very nice guy. I mean, I don't know whether you've heard his BBC Six music show. He has a show on BBC Six Music that he plays records, and that's the real Iggy that I know. He's very charming. Again, someone who you might not expect, but who's very well versed in history and literature and stuff like that. He had a lot of interests other than the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. For sure.
Yeah. Now, the impression I have, and you could correct me if I'm wrong about this, but was Blah 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 the last thing they did together?
Do you know what? You might be right.
Why is that? Did they have a falling out in the 70s?
I don't think so. No, I mean, at that time, I think Iggy was a little bit on a downward wave of his career, a little bit, and I think David, the Blah 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 project was a way of David helping him, giving him a leg up. And they were both both under 40 at that point, just about. And they were good friends. And I think that Iggy picked up the ball and ran with it at that point. That was I think his biggest hit was Real Wild Child, a wild one from that record. And it may well have been the last thing they did together. It may well have been, yes.
Yeah.
Bowie showed up on the Blah 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 tour. He used to show up backstage sometimes when we played, and that could have been the last time.
Yeah. So you're playing on that tour, and that album is more of an accessible pop type of album, and then you were on a tour in support of Skull Ring, which is actually, it's not his best known album, but it's actually one of my favorite Iggy Pop albums.
Oh no, I didn't do that. I didn't do Skull Ring. I think Seamus, that was in our band, went on to do Instinct, the Instinct album after I did blah, blah, blah.
Well, I knew you weren't on the album, but you wrote about touring with him.
Oh, I think I named a chapter. Skull Ring, just because of the way that the band encountered him again when we were rehearsing that song. But yes, I got asked to go back with him in 2014 after the Ashton brothers had left us, and because Iggy had a version of the Stooges, didn't he, with the Ashton boys, and then then Ron died, and he had James Williamson back for a while, and they carried on that way in the mid 2012, something like that.
Yeah.
And then James went away, and then I got a call again, and that's an extraordinary thing in my life to have gone through that windmill in the late 80s with Iggy, and look back on it with some sort of mixed feelings, really, just saying, wasn't that brilliant? I did that, and if only I could do that again, I'd get it right this time. And then 2014 rolls around, and I literally get a phone call from him saying, do you want to come out on the road again and put a band together for me? And it was like, wow, yes, hallelujah.
Yeah.
A great thing to do it at this late time in life, and do it with more calmness and a bit more experience, and just go, yeah, we can do this. It'll be great. And we did have 5 really good years from 14 to 19 on the road with Iggy round Europe, round the world.
Yeah. Yeah. It seemed like, I mean, you wrote some of the songs that you were playing and performing during that tour. And it strikes me that it's almost a different type of music than what you were playing on Blah, Blah, Blah. And just as an activity, is it as different to play as it sounds, as it is different to hear?
Well, I mean, I look back on Blah Blah Blah. It's not really a band album, is it? It's not really an organic rock record. It's more.
Yeah.
It has drum machines at its heart. It's very 80s, and it's
Yeah.
very of its time. And when I first toured with Iggy, we played that record, a lot of things from that record, because he had a big deal with A&M Records, and it was a big deal in the States, and they were shoveling a lot of money into it and all the rest of it. That's what we did. But every time Iggy's had a record out, a new record, even with the Josh Homme thing, he does it for a while. He does new music for a while, but he tends to go back to his touchstones of Stooges music and the Berlin stuff and all that, because he's still really attached to that in his own life, I think. And so we played a lot of older stuff too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's very different. Yeah, the blah blah stuff very different. I mean, yeah. What's great about Iggy Pop, though, still to this day, and he's got a new band now because of Brexit and one or two other things. Don't get me started. He's got a French band because a lot of his work's in continental Europe, and that makes it easier to travel these days and cheaper. But even today, he's still playing his older hits. He's still in touch with that, and it's still a very organic band hit with him. There's no load of sequencers running or all that stuff. It's just literally amps turned up and drums being hit, and it's really great from that point of view.
Wow. So jumping over to Outside, another one of my favorite Bowie albums, and I think of it as a concept album. So I was actually surprised to read that the prototype for the title track was a different song that you wrote that he had heard before he had ever conceived of Outside. And I hadn't heard it. Love is Essential. So I tracked it down, and
oh, did you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, can you spot it? Can you spot what he used from it?
Well, see, that's the thing. Because I read it, I was more attuned to that. But if I had just happened to come across it, I don't think that I would have necessarily noticed.
No, it was a chord sequence, and it was a guitar riff, and it was what my song "Love Is Essential" was built on in 1980. Which I'd recorded on my own album for Oval Records, and a band called The Passions covered it as well. But I was just playing it on stage one day at a Tin Machine sound check. Just because I like the riff, it's a nice thing that I wrote, and so I was playing it, and he just went, "Oh, what the hell's that?"
Yeah,
it's one of the things he scooped up and collected, which he collected things from all over the place. And then it became, he called me up and said, "Do you want to come and play this new album? By the way, the song we started with, Tin Machine, that's now the title track of this record." So that was a nice surprise.
Yeah. And then you were on Through These Architects' Eyes and the Heart's Filthy Lesson.
Yes. It was I just had a day with Outside. It was just, he was in London with Eno doing some stuff at West Side Studio, and he just called me and said, "Hey, we're doing this some final overdubs for the record. Come and play on some stuff." So that was the last thing that I did with him. He was there with Iman and Brian, and that was the last time I saw him.
Yeah. Wow. So one last question about that. And again, I think of Outside as so much of a coherent piece, more than Ziggy Stardust. It's really a concept.
Really? Okay. Wow. I'll have to go back and revisit it, because I'm not overly familiar with it. I mean, I know some of the songs, but I'll have to go back and, because a lot of people talk about that record still, because it got slightly overlooked at the time, and I think it's one of those that's really grown on people over the decades.
Oh, I don't want to do the talking here, but from the time it came out, I thought it was great. And when Bowie died and I started reading these retrospectives of his life, I was very surprised to see how much of a mixed reaction fans had to that album. where my reaction was that it was, the return of David Bowie to top form. And
Yeah, I
yeah,
think Reeves had a lot. I think Reeves had a lot to do with it. I mean, that's, if Reeves has anything really lasting with David, I think it was the fact that he did get him. He pushed him back towards the saxophone, and he directed a kind of creative energy and tried to steer him away from his Phil Collins years in a
yeah,
good,
yeah.
and outside's definitely the fruit of Reeves as well. I think the whole process. I mean, I wish I'd been there at the early part of it, but again, I was just a late addition. But they spent hours and hours and hours and days in Switzerland just jamming and just trying and experimenting with things. And so I think he went back to an very experimental, less formulaic way of working.
Yeah.
Which it shows. It shows. Yeah.
Well, Kevin, this has been terrific. I just have a few more questions just to
That's
wrap
fine.
up.
Yeah.
This is so fascinating. I feel like I could talk to you for much longer than you would want. But this, we're just talking about the work that you did with Bowie and to some extent with Iggy Pop, but the sweep of your career is more than we could talk about if we had multiple days to talk. And
that's why I wrote it down. That's why I wrote it all down.
I really, it's like, yeah, there it is, and I've got a copy in my hand, but it turns invisible when I hold it up because I've got
the brilliant. That's great. Yeah,
if I have it at the right angle. But it's really, I anybody watching this, it is a funny book. It is, you want to keep getting to the next chapter. You get through David Bowie, and there's Morrissey, and there's Sinead O'Connor, and there's Brian Eno, and he's having these singing groups in his house, and it's like you want to get to the next page because these stories are just incredible and they're funny. I can't emphasize that enough.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So if somebody's watching this and they're more intrigued and like your subtitle, they didn't necessarily know your name beforehand, and you wanted to say the definitive Kevin Armstrong piece of music, album, song, if you wanted to make a pitch for somebody to really get to know what you're most proud of, what would you recommend?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's some solo work, some fairly recent solo work. I finished an album called Run in 2019, and that's got some good songs on it. So check it out. And I've got another one in the can ready to go. So I'm still having a late blossoming kind of burst of energy with songwriting, singer-songwriting again. I don't expect that I'll be Taylor Swift anytime soon, but I'm very proud of the work now, and that's good. I mean, I suppose if you go back to as a guitarist, I'd say the Iggy Pop, Winners and Losers, something like that, or Blah Blah Blah. Those songs.
Yeah.
With Bowie, I'm more in the mix with Bowie, so there's less kind of show offy Kev stuff in there. But Absolute Beginners is a good way to look at it, because I'm all about the song, man.
Yeah. I wasn't going to ask this about Run, but you mentioned it. The version of your version of the song Run, which I wasn't familiar with until I read about it in the book, and then I found
looked it up. Yeah.
I actually, I wasn't going to say this because it just sounds like I'm blowing smoke. It's so much better than the Tin Machine version.
Well, again, I think it's because I wrote the riff to Run, and when it went through the mincer of Tin Machine and Reeves and Bowie and all the rest of it, they used it as an influence and a basis for the song. So I get the credit and I get the royalties and all the rest of it, and that's lovely. But the original riff is so good, so nice. I wanted to showcase it as a piece of my own work when I covered it. So that's what I did. Again, it's from very early on in my, but that's very me in terms of guitar. That song, my version of that's very much who I am as a guitar player.
I enjoyed that a lot.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask two closing questions, and the one is I'll just ask them. So you're going on tour, celebrating David Bowie in Europe in 2025 next year. You have a one-man show. You have a new album. What's next? What do you want to draw people's attention to?
Well, I mean, come along and see one of these shows, like the Celebrating David Bowie thing, or if I'm playing with Carlos and George next That will be next fall, really.
Yeah.
And that will be interesting. That will be very interesting because I formed quite a friendship with Carlos. And again, because we have the shared journey of you know, of our work with Bowie, he's been much more significant in Bowie's career than I have musically, of course. But he's a lovely guy. We have something special going on with musically, and that's great. Or come and see one of my one-man shows. You know, just look me up, look up my website, check out my music. I'm 66 years old now, and I've been doing this for 50 years as a profession. So
Yeah.
I'm in no kind of hurry about anything, and I'm not trying to make a clipboard of activity for myself, you know, going forward. I just literally am lucky enough that things come across my path and I think, oh, I want to do that, or I don't want to do that. But whatever, that's what I'm doing at the moment. So I'm always up for meeting new people. I had a lovely time in Amsterdam playing with Carmine and Ava and Starman. Lots of friends. When you do this thing this long, you go to a place and you suddenly realize there's 16 people turn up backstage who you've met before.
Yeah.
You do them, and it's that's so nice, and that's what I'm really enjoying at this late stage of my career, is just meeting people and spreading music.
Well, listen, the next time you're in New York, please let me know. Let me buy you a cup of coffee or something.
You can.
Yeah.
We can go to Captain Fisher's boat. Eric Fisher Eric was Iggy's tour manager, and he built a boat on Pier 66 on the Hudson, and it's called the Frying Pan. And it's
I'm not going to
terrific.
let you off the hook. So
okay.
Please remember.
Right. Okay. We can have lunch at the Frying Pan.
Okay. Sounds like a plan. Let me close by asking you the most superficial possible question, but it's the
Go
way
on.
I close all my interviews. What's your favorite Bowie song and what's your favorite Bowie album, whether you played on them or not?
Well, I do like the earlier albums. I think Ziggy Stardust is an extraordinary piece of work. I mean, of course, everyone loves it, but it's like, in order to completely remake rock culture by writing a bunch of songs about a fictitious rock star and how an audience relates to that, and then go ahead and live it, was a bloody amazing thing to do. And still, it's a terrific record as well. I saw Ken Scott breaking down some stems and bits of the thing and explaining the process in Liverpool and playing some of it over a big PA in Liverpool, and it was just it's so affecting, you know, hearing the vocals solo or hearing how he did the drums and things. That's great. So that is a great record still. If any kid wants to know what Bowie's about, just play them that, and it's there. I like Letter to Hermione. Makes me cry. You know, that song is so beautiful. And he had a very touching side when writing love songs, Bowie, I think.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. Kevin, thank you very much. This has really been wonderful. I'm glad we made the connection, and I'm so grateful that you joined me here today.
Thanks, John. My pleasure.
Okay, thanks a lot.